started. And more people will probably filter in, but that's okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the People and Pollinators Action Network April Climate Justice Focused webinar titled Transcend Nonprofit Industry Toward Collaboration for Collective Impact. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Anna Gray Anderson, and I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for People and Pollinators Action Network, or PPAN. For those of you who aren't familiar with our webinar series, we try to hold one every month with a different speaker. So be sure to sign up for our e-news and check out our events calendar to keep up to date with our upcoming webinars and events. And we've really got a great presentation prepared for you. But first, we just wanted to tell you a little bit about us. So we are People and Pollinators Action Network, or PPAN, the host of this webinar. We focus a lot on making Colorado a safe haven for all who live here, from people to pollinators. We do this through grassroots advocacy, education, and outreach, kind of like this webinar. We also work on policy, community mobilization, and habitat creation. For example, we have a habitat fund, which is based on the sales of our pollinator license plate. And those funds go towards creating pollinator safe spaces while also promoting community mobilization. There really are a lot of reasons to do this work, but one of my favorite facts about pollinators is that there are now over 1,000 native bee species in the state of Colorado alone. So today we are really happy to have Mika Cruz with us of the Boulder County Climate Justice Hive. He's a co-lead of the Boulder County Climate Justice Hive, and Mika is a rabble-rouser, a founder of organizations, and a conspirator of political movements. He's been a youth counselor, a community organizer, a leader, a follower, and a friend. Mika's worked with UN agencies, INGOs, academia, and social movements. And he's advocated, sometimes successfully, for policy change around the world. And as a cis straight presenting man active in solidarity, he's learning much about how to get out of the way. He spent years in military uniform and many more years protesting militarized policies, organizing to deconstruct colonial politics. Mika practices centering marginalized people and taking leadership from impacted communities. So what exactly does climate justice have to do with pollinators? Climate justice and pollinators are actually pretty connected, and both highlight the disproportionate impacts of environmental stress on vulnerable populations. And we think about climate stressors such as shifting temperatures and heavy pesticide use, and those really disrupt the habitats and life cycles of pollinators, which in turn leads to dwindling pollinator populations and decreased pollination services. And this not only jeopardizes biodiversity, but also really affects food security and agricultural productivity, along with other things that really hit marginalized communities the hardest. And advocating for climate justice involves recognizing and addressing the interconnectedness of the social, economic, and environmental issues, while also ensuring equitable access to resources and resilience building strategies for both people and pollinators alike. And as we strive for a more just and equitable future, protecting pollinators becomes not only an environmental imperative, but also a matter of climate justice. So before we get started, as a reminder, please stay muted. Leave your questions in the chat and we will get to them at the end of the presentation, time permitting. We also really encourage you to make a donation today so that PPAN can continue to host this free webinar series. These donations will support PPAN's education, advocacy, and habitat creation efforts this coming spring. And a donation of any size really does make a difference. So thank you so much for your consideration. And I can put a link in the chat to make it easy for people. And that being said, thank you all again for joining us today, and I will pass it over to Mika.
Oh my goodness. Thanks, Anna Gray. Can you hear me okay? Are we on a thumbs up?
You're good to go.
Okay. Well, listen, I can't see anybody's faces, so I'm going to be talking to the screen and hope that everybody is in a good place. As we begin, I think just to arrive, I'm really grateful for everybody taking a break in the middle of the day. Maybe I can ask everybody to just put their feet on the ground for a second and take a deep breath and arrive. Um, Relax those face muscles. Appreciate the opportunity to have a sweet Wednesday afternoon meeting. Thank you so much, Anna Gray, for inviting me to come speak with your people. Um, if there's a topic that's most alive for me to discuss today, it's about our organizing obstacles, because I imagine the folks who are on the call are organizers, one way or another, from different institutions or informal groups or grassroots groups. So thanks for collectively convening. I want to start with maybe just telling you a little bit about myself and why I do what I do. I was born and raised in Jerusalem. For a very long time, I was gung-ho in the Israeli youth movement to join the military. And by the time I joined my military, I discovered that I wasn't defending borders. I was protecting some settlements in the middle of Palestinian cities and neighborhoods. And out of the army, I got very active around Palestine solidarity movements. And through that work, I learned a lot of different things about organizing in that area. First and foremost, that most organizing these days is not as much about frontline mobilizing of communities, but more than anything, the minute an organizer steps into the arena, we're caught in a web of bureaucracies and fundraising. I'm watching the chat and the way we even opened our conversation today. And realizing that anybody who steps into it needs to suddenly deal with volunteers and funds, and that's true for Palestine. I also got very involved with groups around the world. I'm part of a collaborative called Beautiful Trouble, which works with organizers in Haiti and in Nepal and in South Africa, and Syrian activists, activists in Gezi Park in Turkey. And when we all got together to share direct action tactics a few years back, we sat around in a circle and realized that whether we were dealing with a aftermath of an earthquake or a hurricane or a failed dictatorship in Libya or an occupation in Palestine, all of us were writing grants. All of us were catching up with fundraising cycles with international NGOs and last year's reports, doing our best to keep our small team employed one way or another. And as such, structurally, we were also prohibited essentially from talking about things like healthcare for the people that we work with. Retirement plans were completely off the radar. And instead of thinking up long-term, say 10-year goals, because in Jerusalem, I'd find funding for 3-year photography project for young girls in the old city, but it would be very difficult to find a room where folks could talk about how many beds do we need in hospitals in 10 years? How many classrooms are we going to need in schools in 10 years? And over time, it became very obvious that those long-term conversations don't exist around the world for grassroots organizers. In Palestine, we deal with the Danish Church Aid, Norwegian Refugee Council, Oxfam, Save the Children, large NGOs that for the most part are coordinated by UN agencies. The Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs are active there, and in Haiti, and in Nepal, and in South Africa. And it turns out, moving to Boulder, that the situation is not all that dissimilar here. that here in Boulder, grassroots organizers are also caught in this fundraising web, and that for the most part, we're stuck in non-collaborative spaces. Structurally speaking, we're forced to compete with people that are working on the same issues that we are, because that's how funding cycles work with our local governments, with our local foundations, philanthropists. And when we even on, what is it called, Giving Tuesday, we have to compete with everybody else, all the other nonprofits in Colorado State, for funding for our own small organizations. So we're structurally having a very difficult time because we're short-term oriented and we can't collaborate to think longer-term visions. What will we have created by 2030 in regards to climate chaos, or in regards to climate justice, as we collectively understand that the folks who are impacted first and the folks that are impacted most, more often than not, are working class communities who have been dealing with environmental justice issues for generations now, because those communities have been built near the factories and the waste dumps. And now, as climate change and climate chaos is upon us, the communities that are faced with the worst consequences are also more often going to be working class communities, poor communities, more often than not, communities of color, especially in Boulder County and in Colorado, undocumented people. Anna Gray, check-in. So far, so good. Thumbs up.
All good.
Okay. So this is kind of the definition so far of the challenges that we're working with. I want to name for a second while we're at it, because my home country, Israel, Palestine, is in such turmoil these days. And the local organizers are not only dealing with some of the worst geopolitical unfolding, and Israel's attacks on Gaza are becoming unfathomably difficult for organizers to handle. And it brings to mind here in Boulder County, when we talk about the indigenous communities that were here before us, in our case, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, the Ute nations that were here, and we name them knowing that Boulder is one of the whitest communities I've ever been to, and upwardly mobile, and at the same time knowing that it's only been here for around a century and that there were people before us, and it gives new meaning for me to understand what's happening in Gaza these days. That as we depopulate Gaza, I understand now, 100 years later, oh, we know to say Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute, but I wish I understood the lifestyle. And a decolonized approach to our work here is very important as we move forward in our climate justice activities. So solution oriented, and what we want to talk about. I want to tell you a little bit about what we do at the Boulder County Climate Justice Hive at Naropa University. I want to share a little bit about what it means. I think that if we're naming the challenge as essentially a siloed conversation across climate justice community, we know that local government has a lot of budgets and efforts and programs and departments and services that are available, but it's really difficult to find that information. And for the most part, grassroots organizers don't really have the time or the bandwidth to find them. Also, academia works a lot in these arenas, but they don't really work very well with local government so often, nor with grassroots organizers. The nonprofit world is active and it's also siloed. Philanthropy often has its own research and information. We work a lot with faith-based congregations across Boulder County that are doing some excellent work, but oftentimes are detached from frontline realities. Our job at the Boulder County Climate Justice Hive, first and foremost, is to understand who's doing what and where in the landscape of climate justice, to support coordination and encourage collaboration across those siloed sectors, so that we learn who else is right around the corner working on the same issues that we might be working on, but otherwise we wouldn't have ever met. And to illustrate that reality, the way we do that is, number one, to systemically interview actors across those sectors, collecting information through very specific WH questions. Who are you in terms of what sector are you working on? And do you identify as a particular community? How do you do what you do in terms of what skill sets or strengths do you bring to the arena? Is it and what are you working on in terms of, are you working on immigrant rights? Are you working on a compost corner? And an organization can be working on 3 different arenas at the same time. You can be an immigrant rights organization with a youth program that's working on a compost corner. And we want to make sure that you are connected on all of those levels to the different folks working on immigrant rights or youth leadership in the area or environmentalism. We ask, so we said, what are you working on? Who are you? How are you doing what you're doing? We also ask, where are you active? So we understand where services are provided, and we can also see where there are gaps. We ask, why are you doing what you're doing? So we can collect research and analysis and journalism and share it across the board so folks don't have to begin from scratch. And here's where I get to share my screen and also sing some praise for your very own Faith Williams and Mark, who's on the call today. Because what we end up creating is a little bit of visual to understand, number one, some of the arenas we're talking about. Is it housing and homelessness, ecosystem stewardship, food and farming, emergency preparedness, social justice issues, or faith-based organizing? And you can see in the middle, we center the frontline community organizing that happens. Around it, there's a sphere of nonprofit organizations or faith-based communities or academic institutions. And around that, there's the local government services. And we provide a list of who's doing what and where, illustrating as we go who's working on what and how they're doing the different skill sets, just what we talked about now. And also talking about where these issues are taking place in the county. And we also ask, and this to me as an organizer is one of the more interesting conversations, isn't as much, tell me about your current project. What are you working on 2024 or 25? I want to know by 2030, what's the impact we hope to have? Or what will we have left behind by 2030 so that we can start having conversations about the bigger picture issues in terms of our collective impact in a bigger picture arena, helping folks collaborate and coordinate around longer term collective benchmarks, less about our own smaller organization, more about how is our arena, say, for example, regarding food and farming or immigrant rights, collaborating for longer term goals. And so this is one of the first drafts of this concept. And as we go and receive feedback from the different organizations and communities we're working in, especially when it comes to frontline organizers, we improve on our communications and how we're illustrating things and how people want to know what's going on, so that the channels are smoother, so that we learn to work better together with a data-driven systems change approach to climate justice, first in Boulder County as we create and improve this modality, and hoping to scale beyond into Colorado and across the country. And hopefully I'd like to get back to comrades in Haiti and in Nepal and definitely back in Jerusalem, so that we can learn around the world to work more collaboratively. Because right now, I think more than anything, fragmentation and siloed conversations are really getting in our way. It's what we're tripping over. And more than anything else, it's bureaucratic. As our governments shrunk since the 80s and corporate realities have taken over, it's been the nonprofit world and the international nonprofit agencies that have filled those gaps. But as a result, our local community organizers and leaders are caught in a less democratic space. And so this is our way of democratizing collective spaces and centering local community organizing so that that's the leadership that we get to follow and hopefully change the paradigm into a more community-based paradigm. And I think that's where I might take a pause, because Anna Grace said we get to give a little bit of a presentation and then open up for questions and see what's juicy. Is that okay, Anna Grace?
Yes, that's all good.
Okay.
So yeah, if people want to put their questions in the chat, we can start kind of digging into those. We already have one. Someone says they love the graphic. Can we look at it a little more closely?
Ooh, let me see. As in, can I? Yes. Let's see what we can.
And I was also interested, Mika, in kind of the little sub arena efforts, I guess, like where it says energy and pollinators to the left. Or I guess, yeah, my left, or like access to healthcare and how those overlap.
Ooh, great question. So, let me see if I can play with this so that you can see me while we're at it. And how's this? Does this work?
That works.
That works. Great. So when we say climate justice, it's a little bit of a catchphrase for a whole lot of things when it comes to community organizing. Knowing that climate chaos is upon us, knowing that the folks who are impacted first and most are going to be working class, primarily Black and Indigenous and undocumented communities of color is a framework, but we also know that it breaks down into a lot of different issues. And we know that housing is an issue, homelessness is an issue, ecosystem stewardship and how we take care of our natural areas is an arena of organizing, how we handle our food basket in a metropolitan area, emergency preparedness. Each one of these are organizing arenas. And a lot of us, when it comes to organizing, might define our organizing mission in different arenas. So there's different organizations that work in energy, or for example, in pollinators or immigrant rights. And so it's not limited to these first 6 lenses, if you will, knowing that as we go, our job is essentially to map and provide in the database a lens to all of these different issues that together compile what we consider a view of the climate justice world. So when we talk about water and air there at the bottom, or access to healthcare, we know that that overlaps with other organizing arenas. And since our goal essentially is to encourage folks to collaborate with one another, we're going to find out who's active in those particular arenas and put them on one another's radar, encouraging to work better together for longer term visions and goals. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah. There's also another one here on how people can participate in the further development of this graphic, whether it's, they want their organization or program to be included. And then also, like, is there any way for people to provide resources for this mapping and database process? So I guess, like, how could people collaborate with the Hive on this?
100%. So right now, as we revamp and build a more interactive tool, in the meantime, we've got our website is boulder.earth, and you can find a whole lot of information there. I might ask Mark, if he's still on the call, to put a link in our chat to where folks can get more involved. both for information if you're looking for it and if you'd like to provide it, there's contact information on that website.
Great. And then we're also wondering if there's any examples of how this I guess mapping and laying out of it this way has worked on the ground.
Yeah, that's a fair question. To be totally frank, I think we're all organizers. I get that there's some savvy questions here, and for the most part, I think organizers are nose to the grindstone in my experience. And there's a project they're working on, and they're very dedicated to keeping the wheels turning within their little ecosystem. It's our job at the Hive to show up and provide a platform that can alleviate the pressure and the weight on an organizer's shoulders. And that's part of what we're doing. We've been working very closely with the Boulder County Climate Justice Collaborative, which is essentially a lot of frontline grassroots organizations getting together, defining for Boulder County what climate justice means for Boulder County itself. And to be honest, it's difficult. It's not simple. To expect people to collaborate is most difficult, especially when we understand that structurally we're pitted against one another. The Boulder County Community Foundation or the City of Boulder or county departments do provide funding, also on the Colorado state level. And the Denver Community Foundation provide funding opportunities. For the most part, they're all competitive. And so a dozen organizations, grassroots organizations, as you may know, will all submit their proposals, and one or maybe two or five out of a dozen will be chosen, leaving half a dozen folks out in the lurch to find their own funding. As we organized this way, we're taking an all boats rise with a climate justice tide approach, where we work in each of those sectors, not just with grassroots organizers. We also work with the nonprofit organizations. We work with faith-based congregations, local government, and with philanthropy to talk about how to provide that kind of support, either administrative, fiscal sponsorships, and funding opportunities on a collective level for maybe collective longer-term benchmarks, encouraging folks to collaborate for collective impact. We're starting maybe year 3 in this endeavor. It's not as simple or fast as I'd hoped it would be. Sometimes I'm like, oh, easy peasy, I got this. In 3 months, we'll have a project off the ground, and it'll be working no problem. And I am always learning that things take much longer than I imagine. But as we shift the understanding of what we're doing and the opportunities for funding, folks are nodding and understanding, because we're all seeing these problems. We're all stuck in this administrative muck, so to speak, and working with Boulder County Office for Sustainability, Climate, and Resilience, working with the Boulder County Public Health, working with environmental departments in the city of Boulder and cities of Longmont and Erie. We're getting nods in different offices saying, we understand what you're saying, and we're slowly going to move the ship towards a stronger climate justice approach to collective impact.
Great, thank you. There's another question. Is there an organization in Denver uniting groups as you are, that you know of?
Gosh, what's the name of that building on 16th Street? Yes. Does anybody else know the name of the building on 16th Street? Otherwise, I can look it up, but maybe ask another question if there is one while I look it up.
Sure. I maybe to add on to that, does the Hive see any like expansion across Boulder County, like outside of Boulder County for this work? Or are you more just kind of focused on Boulder County?
The reason we're focused right now on Boulder County is essentially to limit the scope geographically so that we can develop a model where we can contain. And Boulder County is actually quite a large county. We've got 12 incorporated cities within the county, and then more than a dozen unincorporated towns in the county. And we've got mountain towns, and we got cities, and we got small rural areas. And so we're learning in time right now just to handle Boulder County. As we work, we're also identifying other arenas, so to speak, and learning how, because it's about building a particular database. It's architecture of collecting this information through those WH questions and all of that technical stuff so that we can create a model, essentially tech model. And I got to tell you, I was raised by social workers and also community organizers. For the most part, correct me if I'm wrong on the call, while the business world has taken us into the future and we got Google Maps and we got a Yelp, and I can drive into any city now and find the best cup of coffee real easy, the organizing world, the justice world, the climate justice world is still essentially, besides being able to Zoom and Google Docs, is still caught in the 70s and 80s in terms of how we organize. The way my parents organized in the civil rights movement is still pretty much what we're working on with now. And so the model we're creating is a little bit of a Yelp for climate justice, for social justice movements. And the model is first in Boulder County. And as we're ready, we'll grow outside, probably to the Front Range. And there are other issues across the country that we know we can create a network for, so that we can learn to do this better ultimately. But yes, the idea is to scale.
Great, thanks. I loved the Yelp comparison. That's a really good visual for me, at least, to think about it. Another question would be, what are some top actions that people can take to support the climate justice movement, and kind of support the movement of more collaboration with grassroots organizing?
I think if folks are a little bit new to the concepts of climate justice, I would suggest finding out who around us is already active, the grassroots organizations, especially in Black communities, in Indigenous organizations, around immigrant rights in undocumented communities, because more often than not, in my experience, they're facing the steepest organizing slope bureaucratically. When it comes to fundraising, registering nonprofits, 501c3s, handling bank accounts, donations is such a difficult, and I think anybody on the call, including Anna Gray, your organization is dealing with this kind of bureaucracy, and we all know what that means. And I work with an American citizenship, and I'm a cis white straight male who I feel comfortable in any room I'm in, and my English is good enough to get along anywhere. My suggestion is to step into a dharma of solidarity, to practice what it looks like to show up and take leadership from other folks around, ask where folks need the most help. And in many cases, it might be helping to connect with fiscal sponsorship, to connect with funders where necessary. Specifically in Colorado, I think Commerce City, just to name what I know today is the most polluted zip code in the country, and the struggle with Suncor in a zip code that's 50% Latino, Latinx communities is in need of some serious solidarity from the rest of the state.
Great, thank you. And if people have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Thank you, Mark, for all of those wonderful links for people to get involved. I was also curious about kind of the strengths, methods, and services part on this map.
So when we look around and we hope to make an impact, it turns out that different organizations across different sectors come with a different toolkit or different strengths. Some grassroots organizers are real badasses and they're really good at direct action. They can do a sit-in at the mayor's office. Other folks are very good at financial assistance or philanthropy. It's necessary to know who's good at drafting new policy or advocating for that new policy. Some folks are very good at research and science information. For the most part these days, when I work on front lines, each of these grassroots organizations or nonprofits or academic institutions or even government offices have different expertise, bring different strengths, and more often than not, they don't work with one another. They have different missions, and to a strong extent are don't even know about one another. What we're attempting to do is to say, if you're working on immigrant rights on any of those levels, from grassroots to grass tops, if you're a nonprofit or an academic like Immigrant Rights Legal Lab at CU in Boulder, if you're an office at Boulder County Public Health, our job is to put all of these different actors that are working on the same issue on one another's radar regularly, sharing what they're doing, and also saying in our arena, these are the strengths that we have so that we can notice if we have a benchmark that by 2027, we need to provide funding for X, advocate or draft policy for Y, and advocate for policy change by 2027, but we're weak in a particular area, we can tell who's got that strength and who we might tap to jump into our arena to collaborate with for a better, more strategic view of who's doing what and where. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
That does, thank you. We have another question. When it comes to organizing, we've touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the greatest challenges and how do we overcome them?
I think there are a bunch of levels that we might all speak to. One of the first ones is indifference. I think we're tired of our politics. There's an election coming up and I'm losing my hair over how awful our options are. And on a local level, I think folks are, when it comes to climate grief, sometimes it's easier to stay in bed, and I don't blame anybody for wanting to stay in bed. And finding the oomph to get out of bed and becoming active is a ginormous act of courage. And then finding a community to be active with that can maintain a healthy, non-toxic, loving, and long-term approach to organizing is a very big deal. And beyond that, de-siloing our conversations, understanding privilege in our arenas and power, and how to leverage that in solidarity for folks who have less privilege and less power is, to me, I see it as a spiritual When we talk about, I'm in Boulder, and our offices are at the University of Naropa, and we talk a lot about it, spiritual enlightenment. And I like to go back to ain't nobody liberated until everybody's liberated, and that the spiritual and the political overlap. And one of the obstacles there is to make that holistic connection, understanding that I can meditate all I want, but if I'm not active and participating for climate justice, that that my personal enlightenment is pretty useless unless I'm working for everybody's liberation. And on a collective level, the all boats rise approach is I'm not liberated until everybody's liberated. I'm not enlightened until everybody's enlightened, is very much to me a sign of the paradigm shift, or a key to our paradigm shift. And so the courage to get up out of bed and become active, the courage to work in solidarity, and to de-silo our infrastructure so we can work more collaboratively, and figuring out the actual infrastructure, social infrastructure, financial infrastructure. That's 501c3, that's bank accounts, that's health insurance, that's retirement. Those are all parts of the infrastructure of what I consider to be a new paradigm that I want around the corner. By 2030, I want folks in my county to have healthcare, access to healthcare, access to retirement, for the realities of the injustices, for us to find the realistic solutions. Because really, I think the biggest obstacle is folks' indifference. We can blame our bigger picture politics all we want, but with enough partners around, I think we can find local solutions to these issues. And then, of course, we'll impact the bigger picture politics as we go.
Great. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. If there's any final thoughts you want to share, Mika, we welcome that. But if not, thank you to everyone for showing up today. And thank you, Mika, so much for sharing with us and letting us learn from you.
Thanks, Anna Gray. I'm thrilled to be able to be here. I hope not having any more questions isn't a sign of disinterest, but like, yep, we covered all the bases. If there's one thing I would add, I think my co-lead at the Hive, together with Mark, thank you so much for putting the links in on the chat. Lodi would say to never forget the other than human world, and that's specifically also for the pollinators around us, that it's not just a human-centric role, that our trees play a role, that our pollinators play a role, and for us to consider them as actors, as partners in the metropolitan areas that we want to work with is part of the mapping project, is taking those partnerships very seriously, uplifting and upholding those too. And I'm noticing Mark's comment here about the Alliance Center in Denver on 16th Street is a co-working and office space hub that houses lots of great organizations. But not sure if they do a lot of coordinating beyond the physical space. I know we're all trying to get better and better at it. I think part of defining those obstacles as obstacles and overcoming them is part of what we're hoping to do.
Great. And would people be able to have a copy of the graphic, or is that still in the works?
I think what we're doing right now with this graphic is sitting down with community groups and asking for feedback. So we're going through these feedback loops about, like, does this fit? And we're like in a Spanish translation often. Are we framing these goals properly? Is this how you see yourself? Because we'd like any given organization to say, yep, that's how I see our ecosystem. And so we're going to do a few more rounds of that, and then we will make this public and share it with you. Essentially, this is one of the first public ta-da previews that we get to share with you. And so thanks so much for we'd love your feedback. And if you follow the links that Mark put on in the chat, we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And in a few weeks, we're going to make this more public and share it with you again.
Great. Well, thank you so, so much. And thanks again to everyone for joining. And I think that concludes the webinar. So I will stop recording. Again, just please consider donating to PPAN. I threw a link in the chat. Again, Mika, we're talking about the fundraising efforts. Please donate.